Well, there are some Grinches out there this Christmas, including, well, the people that created the Grinch, the Dr. Seuss Enterprises. But if you have an Etsy shop, let's say, or you do maybe commercial photo sessions with Dr. Seuss characters, or I would think maybe even Peanuts characters, could you be in trouble? Could you be violating a trademark and expect a cease and desist letter in the mail? John Rizvi is a guest we've had on the afternoon show before. He is the patent professor. He's the patent professor and adjunct professor of patent law at Nova Southeastern Law School in Florida and the author of a couple of books on patents, and he joins us now. Good morning, John.
Good morning. Always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, all right, so I got a little Etsy store, and I'm doing some Grinch shirts and some Cat in a Hat cups and signs and photo sessions. I'm figuring the people at Dr. Seuss, they got other things to do. They don't know I exist or my shop exists. What are the chances I get away with marketing that kind of merchandise and not hearing from Dr. Seuss Enterprises? They are cracking down, aren't they?
They're absolutely cracking down, and typically if you're kind of like a small mom-and-pop shop, the chances normally would be really low because there's bigger fish to fry, so to speak. But Dr. Seuss Enterprises has been very unforgiving of any use of their intellectual property. So in fact, even photographers at malls that are offering the Grinch photo shoots have been the subject of cease and desist letters. Certainly, anything on Etsy that you're selling with the Grinch is at risk, and it brings up, especially with the photographers, a lot of them don't see the difference between a Santa Claus photo shoot and a Grinch photo shoot. And you do a Santa Claus photo shoot and everything's fine. You get no cease and desist letters. You're not sued. All of a sudden, you do the same thing with the Grinch, and you get hit with a cease and desist letter. So what's the difference? The difference is that Santa Claus cannot be traced to a single origin. There's no single author. Copyrights expire 70 years after an author's death. So even if there was, it's part of the public domain. The Grinch, on the other hand, comes from Dr. Seuss's book, The Grinch That Stole Christmas, which was published in 1957. So the copyrights are still in force.
Do you believe that Dr. Seuss Enterprises is harmed by somebody doing a photo shoot with a Grinch at the local mall?
Yeah, and in fact, not only do I think they're not, well, harmed is tough. Like it's absolutely helping their licensing because it's free publicity, free promotion. But the way intellectual property works is if you don't enforce your rights, they're weakened. So the same thing with trademarks. Companies that don't enforce their trademarks, those trademark rights are weakened. They either can be abandoned or there's latches. There's all kinds of defenses. Kind of like a lot of people have heard about adverse possession on real estate. If you put your fence on your neighbor's property and they don't say anything for 7 years, in a lot of states, that property is now yours because when it comes to real land, you have a duty to protect your property. And if somebody's encroaching, you need to speak up or lose your rights. And that's part of the concern. So they're in a tough spot. Like if they do enforce, especially if they enforce against these photo shoots are really tough because a lot of the photographers these aren't like high profit enterprises.
No.
They actually are claiming they're doing it for the children. They're bringing happiness into this season. And here you have Dr. Seuss Enterprises looking like a real life Grinch because they're stopping all the fun and sending out cease and desist letters. So as an intellectual property attorney, I do feel for the company. They're in a tough spot. Like if they don't enforce, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. If they don't enforce their rights, it certainly weakens their licensing. I mean, Jim Carrey and Universal Pictures paid a pretty penny for licensing rights to the Grinch for their movie in 2000, The Grinch That Stole Christmas, with Jim Carrey. In order for them to maintain that kind of power for licensing, they have to enforce their rights or their rights are weakened. So they have no choice But to do that,
don't they?
But it's just go ahead.
I was just going to ask, don't they do this, though, too, John, to protect their creative property? In other words, if my Grinch hasn't shaved for a few days, is holding a bottle of bourbon, got a cigarette hanging out of its mouth, that's another reason why I might enforce these copyrights, because I don't want somebody turning my Grinch into something it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is that. You want to protect the reputation as well, and that's a lot of times. But that's just not true for that's true for all trademark rights. Like if somebody starts selling, opens up a burger chain, somehow has the word McDonald's in it, and if the burgers are not up to par, the McDonald's has two reasons. One, of course, their normal rights for intellectual property, loss of business and profits, but also their reputation may suffer if there are consumers that actually believe, if there's a horrible burger sold out there that is somehow consumers believe it's attributed to McDonald's, then their company suffers damages. And that's another risk, although I think it's a bit of a strain. I mean, most consumers that are at the mall and they see a Grinch photo shoot, I don't think they're associating that photographer with Dr. Seuss Enterprise. I think they realize that these are all independent photographers, and if you have a grumpy, unshaven, like not professional Grinch, I don't think it's really going to impact the reputation of Dr. Seuss Enterprises, because consumers are going to be smart enough to figure out that this isn't necessarily attributed to them.
I guess we can assume, John, that, around Christmas time, the Peanuts characters are popular. We can assume that the estate is Charles Schultz and Peanuts, and, they're doing the same thing as Dr. Seuss. I mean, we've been talking about Dr. Seuss, but Dr. Seuss Enterprises aren't the only ones that crack down on this sort of thing if it comes to their attention.
Yeah, no, they're not. In fact, Disney, Disney's been, certainly not necessarily holiday related, but they've been fanatical about how they enforce their intellectual property. In fact, a few years ago, they had sued a daycare for having painted Mickey and Minnie on their walls without obtaining a license. And they regularly go after bake shops for offering Mickey as a character on cakes if the bakery does not have a formal license. So Dr. Seuss is not alone. The estate of Elvis Presley has tried to go after Elvis impersonators as well. I think what makes Dr. Seuss in an unusual position is that they really seem to vamp up their enforcement during the holiday season, during Christmas, and that's just they have to, right? Like you have to stop enforcement when it happens. No one's going to go for a Grinch Christmas shoot in July, right? So they have to enforce the rights in December, and that's always tough.
And, of course, it would be cost prohibitive if I'm just doing photos at the mall or I got an Etsy shop to pay licensing fees to Dr. Seuss Enterprises. That's going to be a little cost prohibitive for most people, right?
Yeah, it would. What kind of got all of this on the map is that the photographer, the social media is changing everything. So now this was the original photographer that stirred all of this up had a photo shoot in 2019, and the photo shoot became viral, and that's how it came to their attention. So social media changes things. It's even though it's a small local photo shoot at a mall, it still could be a threat to Dr. Seuss Enterprises if it gets publicity nationwide, and that absolutely can happen. Yeah,
with social media, that certainly happens all the time. John Rizvi, the patent professor. All right, so you folks be careful when you're using these trademarked characters. John, thank you very much for your time today, and have a Merry Christmas, sir.
Yeah, same to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. John Rizvi, the patent professor.